You've felt it for years, haven't you? That subtle ache, that quiet distance between you and the world. You move through rooms like a watcher, not a participant, noticing things others seem blind to. The tension behind someone's smile, the truth buried under their words, the meaning humming beneath every choice. And yet, you've wondered why your path feels so solitary. It's not because you're broken. It's not because you're too sensitive, too intense, or too different. No, it's because you're awakening. And in every ancient tradition, Plato whispered it, the Stoics lived it, and the myth-makers carved it in stone. There is a sacred truth. Those who see deeply must walk a different road. And that road, at first, feels like being alone. In Plato's allegory of the cave, humanity sits chained before shadows, mistaking illusions for reality. But one person, breaks free, turns around, and walks toward the light. This is the part most people remember, the escape, the enlightenment, the triumphant return. But Plato hid a far more haunting insight, one modern souls rarely hear. The moment you see the truth, you are no longer compatible with the crowd. The awakened one doesn't fit back into the cave, not because they're superior, but because their eyes have adjusted to a larger reality. In mystical traditions, this is called the initiate separation, that sacred moment when your consciousness expands faster than your surroundings, and the world you once knew cannot hold you anymore. Alan Watts echoed the same idea. When you wake up, you discover you are no longer who you thought you were. Jung called it individuation, the soul's urgent need to step away from collective noise to hear its own voice. And the ancient myths mirrored it. Hermes walking the boundaries, Odin seeking wisdom alone beneath the world tree, Buddha leaving his palace. Across time, one message repeats. The path of deeper consciousness is, by nature, an untethering, not as punishment, but as initiation. You didn't choose this path. You didn't wake up one day and decide, I want to be different. It started quietly. Maybe you felt out of place in conversations everyone else enjoyed. Maybe you sensed truths that made others uncomfortable. Maybe the noise of the world felt too loud, too shallow, too rushed. Or maybe you learned early that the things you felt deeply, the intuitive insights, the existential questions, the longing for meaning, didn't belong in the environment you were placed in. So you adapted. You hid your depth behind small talk. You softened your intuition to not overwhelm others. You played normal to avoid being misunderstood. But the cost was heavy. Society trains people to value fitting in over waking up. You were taught to suppress your inner world to maintain outer harmony. You were conditioned to believe your sensitivity was a flaw, your insight a burden, your solitude a failure. And somewhere along the way, you began to ask a painful question. Why do I always feel separate, even when I'm surrounded by people? That ache, that feeling of spiritual displacement, isn't a defect. It's the signal that your consciousness is evolving beyond the places that once contained you. A part of you knows it, but another part still tries to hold on to what's familiar. And that is where the suffering grows. Here's the truth almost no one tells you. Your loneliness isn't a void, it's a threshold. The world you feel disconnected from, you're outgrowing it. Your mind is expanding faster than the environment around you. Like Plato's freed prisoner, your eyes have adjusted to a light others haven't yet seen. Your solitude isn't rejection, it's resonance shifting. You're not losing people, you're shedding illusions. You're not becoming isolated, you're becoming aligned. You're not meant to walk the path society paved, you're meant to walk the path your consciousness is carving in real time. This is why certain relationships fade, why certain conversations feel shallow, why the places that once felt safe now feel limiting. You're not failing to belong, you're being called elsewhere. Your soul is undergoing what the mystics called the sacred withdrawal, the period just before an inner expansion so profound it rearranges your entire relationship with life. And what you've mistaken as walking alone is actually step one of waking up. To understand why highly conscious people must walk alone, we must journey deeper, into cosmology, psychology, ancient philosophy, and myth. A. Cosmology. Consciousness expands in silence. In the universe, stars form in darkness, dense clouds where pressure shapes light. Consciousness works the same way. When your awareness grows, it seeks stillness. Noise dilutes it. Crowds scatter it. Shallow environments suffocate it. You don't walk alone because you reject others. You walk alone because your inner universe is rearranging itself, and external interference would distort the process. Just like a star needs isolation before it shines, your soul needs solitude before it awakens. B. Psychology. Individuation requires separation. Carl Jung warned that the biggest danger to a person's soul is the unlived life. Individuation, the emergence of your true self, requires separation from the collective psyche. Most people function through borrowed identities, beliefs borrowed from family, dreams borrowed from culture, values borrowed from society. But when your consciousness rises, these borrowed layers begin to fall away. And with each layer that dissolves, you step further from the crowd and closer to who you truly are. This process is inherently solitary, because only you can walk it. See Plato. The cave cannot understand the sun. Plato's allegory wasn't a metaphor for intelligence, it was a metaphor for perception. Once you've seen the sun, shadows lose their charm. Once you've experienced truth, illusion becomes unbearable. Once your eyes adjust to a wider world, the cave feels suffocating. Your aloneness is not exile. It is the natural consequence of expanded sight. D. Mythology. The hero leaves the village. Every myth begins with separation. Hercules leaves the ordinary world before his trials. Moses ascends alone to the mountain. Arjuna stands on the battlefield between two worlds. Odysseus departs the familiar to discover himself. The hero is never transformed inside the village. Transformation happens on the thresholds, the deserts, the mountains, the forests, the seas. These symbols represent psychological solitude. The message is ancient and universal. Consciousness expands at the edges, not the center. E. The illusion of identity dies in silence. Your identity, the one built from expectations, roles, approvals, dissolves when you're alone. The noise of others reinforces who you used to be. The silence of solitude reveals who you actually are. Highly conscious people walk alone because they must shed layers of false identity. An identity cannot die under the gaze of others. As the mystics said, you must go into the wilderness to meet the part of yourself that never left. At some point, something changes. Not dramatically, but quietly. In the subtle chambers of your awareness, you start to realize your solitude isn't emptiness, it's spaciousness. Your silence isn't avoidance, it's clarity. Your distance isn't disconnecting, it's discerning. Your difference isn't a problem, it's a signal. You begin noticing things. 1. You no longer tolerate what drains you. Shallow conversations, performative relationships, chaotic environments, they fall away without conflict. 2. You feel less responsible for others' emotions. You stop contorting yourself to accommodate people who never tried to understand you. 3. You sense an inner authority rising. Not arrogance, alignment. A deep knowing of who you are and where you're going. 4. You stop chasing belonging. Because you finally see that you never lacked belonging. You only lacked resonance. 5. You experience peace in your own company. Not the peace of avoidance, but the peace of authenticity. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And begin asking, what is awakening within me? The loneliness softens, the inner noise quiets, and instead of fearing the path, you start listening to it. This is the moment the soul exhales. Life doesn't become louder after awakening, it becomes clearer. You move differently. You listen differently. You speak less but mean more. You choose connection over company, depth over familiarity, alignment over approval. Here's what begins to unfold. 1. Your relationships shift. You no longer force bonds. You're drawn to people who feel like oxygen, not obligation. Conversations become more honest, more vulnerable, more grounded. 2. Your intuition sharpens. You trust your inner signals. The quiet voice that once whispered now speaks with unmistakable clarity. 3. You begin creating instead of reacting. Your energy is no longer scattered. You become intentional, deliberate, and spiritually self-responsible. 4. You develop a calm center. Not because life is easier, but because you are less divided inside yourself. 5. You walk lightly. You're less attached to outcomes, less affected by noise, less entangled in other people's projections, and perhaps most importantly, 6. You stop apologizing for your depth. You no longer shrink to make others comfortable. You no longer hide your insight. You no longer dilute your presence. Your solitude becomes sovereignty, not isolation, inner independence, not withdrawal, inner alignment, not loneliness, inner clarity. You walk alone, but not lonely, because now you walk with yourself. In the end, Plato's sacred warning was never a warning at all. It was a reminder that awakening always begins with a step away from noise, away from illusions, away from the familiar walls of the cave. A reminder that solitude is not exile, but elevation, not separation, but preparation, not the end of belonging, but the beginning of becoming. And perhaps the most profound truth of all, you were never walking alone. You were walking ahead. The world may not understand your path now, but one day someone still sitting in the cave will see your footsteps leading into the light, and they will quietly follow. Until then, walk with courage, walk with clarity, walk with your whole awakened soul, because the path of higher consciousness was never meant to be crowded. It was meant to be yours.